Good afternoon. Getting right down to business here. We are doing it live and doing more at 4 weekday afternoons, right after Guy Benson at 3 here on 790 KBC. And we do all this just before the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang at 5. Mottek On Money, live on the air right now, 790 KBC. Streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com. And you're on demand. Mottek On Money podcast, kbc.com, Apple, iTunes, YouTube, all of your favorite podcast platforms. Wild day on Wall Street to kick off the month of March. Stocks beat a retreat to kick off the new month, extending losses racked up in the month of February. The market turned south after President Trump's confirmation of tariffs on Canada and Mexico kicking in starting tomorrow. The Dow came in for a closing loss today of 650 points, off the worst level of the day. We settled at 43,191, and looks like the S&P 500 gave back 105 to 5,850, and the NASDAQ plunging nearly 500 points at 18,350. Stocks took a downward move after President Trump's repeating the 25% levies on imports from Mexico and Canada would kick in tomorrow, and that put cold water on investor hopes of a last-minute deal to avert the full tariffs on Canada and Mexico. With the market seemed to be nervous about this. All three of the major averagers had traded in positive territory earlier in the day, with the Dow up about 200 points early on. The president also signing an action to impose another 10% duty on China. We did see the big cap tech names move lower, including NVIDIA taking a hit today, down nearly $11 at $114 and change, dropped nearly 9%. Broadcom and Super Microcomputer also moved lower. The small cap focus Russell 2K dropping close to 3%. Speaking of small caps, we'll get an update on what's happening on the small business scene later this hour. I'll be joined live by Jeff BRABANT, Vice President of Federal Government Relations for the National Federation of Independent Business, the voice of small business in the United States. He'll be joining us live later this hour. Stocks taking a direct hit from the tariffs, including the auto names, GM and Ford hitting lows of the session after the president's comments on tariffs. I'll discuss what all this means to car buyers, you the consumer, and car makers coming up later this hour with our go-to car expert, Lauren Fix, editor-in-chief of Car Coach, and the co-host of the Total Car Score podcast. She'll be joining me live later this hour. Rough start to the month of March, coming after the three major averages did rack up losses for the month of February, with the NASDAQ especially hit hard last month, a pullback of about 4%. Softer than expected readings on manufacturing and construction out today as well, adding to some economic concerns. And this is going to be a big week for economic reports, including what we call here the big enchilada of monthly economic reports, and that's the jobs report we get from the Labor Department. That'll be coming out an hour ahead of the opening bell on Friday. Joining us now with the latest on your money, the markets, the economy, gold, crypto, and the whole works now. Joining us live, top-ranked money manager Ken WINANS, the president and chief investment officer at WINANS Investments, which you can find at winansinvestments.com. Ken WINANS, also a market historian, author of numerous books, including his latest, Investment Atlas 3, Creating Wealth Using Historical Trends. Also a Forbes magazine contributor. Also has his crypto credentials. Sounds like we have the right person in the studio here. And most importantly, he's host of Winning with WINANS, which is heard every Monday evening at 6 p.m. on your favorite station, 790 KBC. Good afternoon, Ken WINANS.
Hello, Frank. And you know what? You always have me either on a good day or a bad day. So I guess it's the best of times, worst of times, and you always seem to have me there.
Well, you're the right person to have on the air no matter what, Ken WINANS. So give us your reaction to this latest market action here today.
Well, you know, over the weekend, there was a lot of news coming out across the board. I mean, in my line of work, you have to always, you're always on call, so to speak. You feel like you're a bit like somebody who just has to be aware of what's in the news. But with that said, it's very clear that there's going to be continued volatility geopolitically, what's going on. It was interesting to look at a lot of the publications over the weekend. I mean, Barron's had a big article talking about, hey, maybe it's time to buy Chinese stocks if you want to counterbalance the possibility of a trade war. I think days like today, I think a couple of things we were learning. Number one, this is a very different year than last year. You know, 2025 is going to be a year where the leadership's changing. The trend is still up. I mean, we still largely have, the markets are largely still near their all-time highs. These are standard pullbacks. But what I'm noticing is, again, the leadership is changing. And case in point, the stocks that led today believe it or not, were consumer stocks and utility stocks. So even with all this talk of tariffs, I mean, I jokingly, what we used to call the sin stocks actually had a great day.
On You're Live with Money Manager Ken Winans, very interesting. And the markets do seem to be nervous about tariffs. Ken, as this plays out, how do you think the markets will notice, by the way, the stock futures are up ahead of the opening bell tomorrow here now? Yeah,
I think one of the things I look at is as a technician, I look and see, hey, where are we? The internals of the market still in check? The answer is yes. They're not as strong as they were last year, but they're still generally in check. The S&P 500, the Dow, they're still above their 100-day, 200-day moving averages. As a technician, I care about these things. But I do think that I will be surprised if when we get to the end of this year, if we are having much above a high single-digit or a low double-digit type year. You're just not going to have things go straight up forever. But, Frank, I do think we're learning that these high beta type areas, like certainly the AI stocks, hey, they are two-edged swords. They go up high and they come down fast. So you just got to be prepared for that if you have them in your portfolio.
All right. Look what a day Elon Musk had today. Elon Musk, we saw Tesla shares take a hit today. It's been under pressure recently, down more than $8 to $284 and change. And I'm looking at the Forbes.com real-time billionaires list. $4.7 billion right out of his pocket. Elon Musk is down to $354.8 billion. And the list goes on here. Mark Zuckerberg dropped $4.5 billion as Meta stock took a hit today. Jeff Bezos with Amazon down nearly $7 billion in one day today.
Well, I just hope none of them are listening to the show, Frank. I mean, they might not listen again, but here's the point. In the case of Elon Musk, one, SpaceX is not publicly traded, so probably that end of the portfolio did fine. But, look, everybody who has money tied to equities, you are going to have these situations, these maturations in the market. But I do think what everybody does need to also think about, we're going into tax season. Money traditionally leaves the market to pay taxes. And I do think there's a fair number of people who booked some profits at the tail end of last year. So we might find, although March and April typically are good months, but again, they're just not going to be taken off the way they did.
All right, wild ride for cryptos, especially today. Bitcoin got up to around 95,000. Now it's back to around 86,000. What about the wild ride that we've seen lately with Bitcoin and the other cryptos you follow?
Well, I actually found it interesting today that Coinbase, which is an exchange, as I kind of use as a bellwether for crypto, because it is an exchange for all the very types of crypto that are out there, it took a big hit today. It was down about 5%. We're looking for regulatory guidance on what's going to happen with crypto. What I find interesting, and most of us don't even study it, I'm a commodity trader. I follow the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, and the Chicago Mercantile Exchange is basically opening its door to allow other futures contracts trade on other cryptos. This is a big game changer because this is how you can hedge your currencies. And so I think we're going to find more and more of those things. The big shock with crypto, still in my way of thinking, is the decoupling of Ethereum from Bitcoin. And then we are still proving yet again that Bitcoin and NASDAQ have this very strange correlation or relationship. So as long as the NASDAQ has trouble, I think it's safe to say Bitcoin will continue having some headwinds.
All right, what do you see ahead here for the tech names? Historically, tech has been very interest rate sensitive, and now it appears tariff sensitive. What about NVIDIA and all the Mag 7 names here? And as you mentioned, crypto along for the ride.
Well, I think that the thing we have to remember, there's also the other sensitive, which is valuation sensitive. These stocks, we came out of 2024, they were priced for perfection. They really all were. So to have a pullback in some of these names, I mean, look at NVIDIA. Yes, it's down 16% year to date, but it's still up 36% over the last 14 months. So it's hard to cry over spilt milk. But I mean, again, that's the kind of stock these things are. At the end of the day, Frank, many of them are good long-term investments, but you have to weather the storm with them. But with that being said, I think there's going to be continually rebalancing within portfolios, especially mutual fund companies, till we'll see some of these names get dropped, at least in the short term, and repositioned into some of these other, shall we say, just kind of dull areas.
All right, what about gold, which, of course, has also seen eye-popping gains this year, back above $2,900 today here. Hit record highs earlier this year, close to 3,000.
Well, gold and silver. Silver had another big day, too. The SLV ETF, I think, was up 6% today. So there is a run. There is let's say, a run for cover, so to speak. What I would say is this. The problem with gold, and many people are very sensitive to it, again, nothing goes straight up forever. Gold has certainly had its doldrum times, too. But it seems to, we call it a crowded trade. I have people who have never bought gold before contacting me and saying, hey, I want to go buy gold coins. I get a little concerned when people are buying it because they heard about it at a dinner party. That is a little bit of a cautionary tale. But the trend in gold, silver, and some of the other base metals is very strong.
Of course, gold considered a safe haven. Remember, during the financial crisis, people were talking about getting canned goods, gold coins, and rifles and heading up into the mountains back in those days during the financial crisis. But
absolutely.
Right. So considered a safe haven and still is.
Absolutely. But I think it's also, look, we're going to be going into earnings season in the next month or so. We are going to have, just as we did at the end of the year, there's going to be some good, bad, and ugly. But I think today, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, Frank. The fact that the consumer stocks, now, if you're going to talk about stocks that should be sensitive to tariffs, these are candy stocks, alcohol stocks, tobacco stocks. These are products that are bought all over the world, and yet they're up. I think it goes to show the tariffs are not going to hit evenly industries across the board. It's going to have different effects at different times. I think that's a telltale sign.
All right. And the egg stocks, right? Everybody's talking about the price of eggs, and I was at the supermarket this morning, as a matter of fact, and noticed the price is still very, very high, but at least there were some eggs available. What about eggs and the egg names here?
Well, of course, the eggs are tied to, here we had a good old-fashioned agricultural or a livestock disease that ravaged the chicken crop or the chicken herds. But you're having the same situation happen with cattle. I've been watching it very closely. I mean, not to get too geeky here, but you have live and feeder cattle. Anybody who's in the Central Valley who's listening to the show right now knows what I'm talking about. But the bottom line is steak is going to continue to go up in price. You're going to have probably poultry is going to go up in price. But yet again, hog is not. So the hog crop or the hog herds are not being affected by the same disease the same way. I would just simply say this. We're having topsy-turvy in the food chain. It's going to continue.
All right. At this point, let me ask you the big question we ask here on this program. Ken Winans, where are you putting money now and or taking it off the table?
Well, I would say probably fourth quarter last year, I started doing the shift into more financial stocks. I've held off on doing that, but to be honest with you, Frank, I'm going to take a good hard look at between what I saw here with the consumer stocks and then also with utilities. I know that for a lot of people, it's a dull, boring area, but I think you're going to see money reallocate there. But to be honest with you, some of these names that just haven't been doing anything for a long time, I think you're going to take a good hard look at some of the beer stocks, Bud, Tap, which is Molson. They're both up on the year. Coca-Cola, believe it or not, is up 16% on the year. I think you should take a look at some of these old names that people haven't looked at in a couple of years. Look at Hershey, HSY. Look at, a good grief, Tootsie Roll. I take a good look at some of these kind of just boring stocks. I think they're going to be players going forward.
Very interesting. And another, we saw some write-ups today on European defense stocks and the defense sector overall, given the nervous time and President Trump with that Zelensky encounter there at the White House when World War III came up. What about the defense names here?
Well, I think you have to look at contract to contract. Now we know that Doge is very clearly the Pentagon's going to be next in the sights of Doge. There's going to be good, bad, and pretty awful situations that come out of that. But I think that certain types of, whether they're electronics, I would certainly take a good hard look at GE Aerospace. I think would be a name that I would still stick with. Raytheon would be a name that I would stick with because, again, they make nuts and bolts type thing for the modern military. But I think big ticket defense contracts, that's a political football. I would probably stay away from those right now.
Very interesting. And the other thing that made news, the news that Bitcoin surged on plans for a crypto reserve. It surged over the weekend and then took this wild ride today. What is the view on this crypto reserve and how it's being received, this idea?
It would take we'd have to have a whole other show to talk about this. I was just literally telling a group of investors over the weekend, look, one of the reasons we went off the gold standard, there was not enough gold to back all these currencies in an ever-growing post-World War II economy. I mean, most people don't understand it. Bitcoin has a limit. There's only so many tokens you can put out there. So if you start talking about this being central bank type scenario for everybody around the world, I just don't think there's enough coins. I think you're going to have other cryptos involved in that kind of thinking.
As you know, we speak to the biggest fans of crypto on this program, as well as the harshest critics, and people look to you for an education on all this. Ken Winans, as far as reliable crypto analysis, how does one go about doing that?
Well, as a technician, I believe in trends and price trends. And I have found that you can use the same type of trend analysis that I do on stocks and on commodities. And right now, as long as Bitcoin stays in the 80,000 range and up from there, it's still in a long-term trend. I mentioned earlier, I'm still concerned about the decoupling with Ethereum. We're going to have to see how that kind of plays out. But at this point in time, for people who do like the idea of adding crypto to their portfolio, you could argue you're buying the dip. And I do still think this is a buy the dip type of market, not sell the rally.
And it is to be noted, the president's announcement over the weekend related to a strategic crypto reserve not only included Bitcoin, but Solana and XRP as well.
Well, and I still think we're going to see a lot of stable coins added to that list over the course of next year. The other quick thing in crypto, Frank, there's a lot of talk about a lot of new, what we call ICOs coming out over the next 24 months. These are initial coin offerings. A lot of them will be tied to stable. But again, they're all waiting for what's the regulatory landscape going to look like under the Trump administration. That's yet to be seen.
All right. It looks like Solana futures were being launched as well later this month.
That's right. And that's through the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. That's a big thing because now instead of when you and I talk about the big three automotive companies, now we have the big three crypto futures contracts. And I think it's going to be very popular.
That is very significant and very interesting. And we'll luckily have some more time to delve into all of this at 6 o'clock this evening on Winning with Winans when I join Ken Winans on Winning with Winans. So we'll be able to continue the conversation. So, in fact, we do have another show to talk about crypto and all the big news today and what's happening with the markets and the economy and crypto, gold, and the whole works, tariffs. So any thoughts about what's going to happen tomorrow?
Well, every day is a new day with the Trump administration, Frank. So I think it's safe to say that if you're not a morning person and you work in my business, you better start being, because the news comes out hot and heavy early. I would just say this. Futures are actually up right now. I still think this is a buy the dip type of stock market. You have to get your list together. But as I said before, this time of year, you're getting ready for another earnings season. You got retail sales numbers coming out over the next 2 weeks. There's going to be a lot of activity that could cause additional volatility.
Terrific, Ken. Thank you very much for joining us live this afternoon, and we look forward to continuing the conversation on Winning with Winans this evening at 6 o'clock and every Monday evening at 6 right here on your favorite station, 790 KBC. Ken Winans, thank you again for joining us live here.
Thank you too, Frank.
And right after the freeways now on 790 KBC. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. Good afternoon. Wild ride for stocks. Up early, down at the close, but off the worst level of the day. The Dow down 650 points today at the closing bell, back to 43,191. The S&P 500 gave back 105 points at 5,850, and the NASDAQ down nearly 500 at 18,350. The yield in the 10-year note is back down to 4.16%. That's the one that impacts the fixed-rate mortgage rates out there, and mortgage rates have been coming down lately. Wild ride for the cryptos, as we've been talking about here, and we'll be exploring this even more at 6 o'clock this evening on Winning with Winans here on 790 KBC. Bitcoin on the rebound now, up 168 or so to 86,105. Ethereum up 47 at 2,157, and Doge at the moment at 20 cents. President Trump on social media announcing the names of 5 digital assets he expects to include in a new U.S. strategic reserve of cryptocurrencies, spiking the market value of each over the weekend, and then a wild ride today. The president said in a post on Truth Social that his January executive order on digital assets would create a stockpile of currencies, including Bitcoin, Ether, XRP, Solana, and Cardano. The names have not previously been announced. More than an hour later, the president added, and obviously BTC and Ethereum as other valuable cryptocurrencies, in his words, will be at the heart of the reserve. Bitcoin is the world's largest cryptocurrency by market value, was up more than 11% at 94,164 on Sunday afternoon. Ethereum, the second largest crypto, was up about 13% at 2,516. The total cryptocurrency market has risen about 10% or more than $300 billion in the hours since the president's announcement. And, of course, we've seen a lot of volatility since then. And right now, as I mentioned, Bitcoin's back to 86,100 or so, and Ethereum back down to 2,157. Auto stocks in focus today with the tariff announcement by President Trump today confirming that tariffs will be kicking in on Mexico and Canada starting tomorrow. 25% tariffs and an additional 10% duty will be imposed on China. We did track the auto names here today, including Ford down 16 cents at $9.39, GM down $1.75 at $47.38. We'll be talking more about the impact these tariffs will have on the auto market, including the consumer, as well as the automakers, coming up later this hour with Lauren Fix, editor-in-chief of Car Coach and the co-host of the Total Car Score podcast. NVIDIA, the Magnificent One, down nearly $11 today to $114 and change. Apple down nearly $4 at $238 and change. Tesla down more than $8 at $284 and change. Meta, which had that big record run-up recently until recent weeks, down 13 and change to $655.05. Microsoft down $850 at $388.49. And Google, rounding out the Mag 7 names, down $356 at $168.66. And now the latest news on 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues, 790 KABC. Good afternoon. The major stock market average is taking a hit today on the latest comments on tariffs from President Trump. It looks like tariffs will be kicking in on Canada and Mexico starting tomorrow, and an additional tariff on China as well. The Dow coming in for a closing loss today of 650 points. The S&P 500 down 105, and the NASDAQ down 497. And the Russell 2K Small Cap Index was down about 3%. Let's get an update on what's happening on the small business scene today. Joining us live now is Jeff BRABANT, the Vice President of Federal Government Relations for the National Federation of Independent Business. The NFIB stands tall for small business, the voice of small business here in the United States. Jeff, thank you very much for coming to the line here this afternoon.
Well, thanks for having me on.
A lot to talk about, certainly, with one big headline after another coming in. But certainly on the tariff issue, how do you see all of this impacting small business?
Small businesses are still trying to get a feel for that. Our members are so small. The average member's got about 70 employees that when you vary by industry, some industries are going to be a little affected by this. Some industries aren't. So we're still trying to feel it out and kind of hear from our membership to see exactly how it's going to affect every industry out there. But people are paying attention and trying to figure out how this is going to go for all of them.
Certainly pro-business administration in place. What's the reaction to what's happened so far, and what's your latest reading on all that?
Yeah, I think the immediate thing is the halt on the regulations has been great. There was just a big announcement out of the White House yesterday that they're going to put a pause on enforcement of these beneficial ownership information reporting requirements. This one's a huge win for 32 million small LLCs and small businesses. This was the one that was going to require businesses of 20 or fewer employees to file their beneficial ownership information with an organization called the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. And if they didn't, they can go to jail for 2 years. So the administration just announced they're not going to enforce this regulation, and they're going to eventually write a new rule that says, well, you know what, if we're going to try to get money launderers and stop money laundering, let's just target foreign-owned entities and let's not target American small businesses. So that's a good short-term win for small business. We still hope Congress can repeal this thing, but that's just fresh news as of last night for small businesses. And
that's very big news. Jeff BRABANT live with us here, Vice President of Federal Government Relations for the NFIB. So tell us more about this. This is something that was recently in the news and was on the radar screen for small businesses, or at least should have been. But now this big news as of last night. Tell us again what small business people need to know about that.
So as of last night, fortunately, if you're one of these small business owners, you have 20 or fewer than employees, you're not going to have to file anymore. I know there was a lot of concerns that there were very few businesses who actually were aware of this regulation who were filing. And we're talking about 32 million small businesses were supposed to file. Originally by March 21st was the date that was set. There was a real concern that if you forget to do this, you can go to jail for 2 years. And I don't think anyone thought it was a good idea to make small business owners who weren't even sent a notice that they have to register into unintentional felons who can get fined up to $10,000 and go to prison for 2 years. So This is the administration's announced they're not going to enforce it. They've also announced they're going to significantly shrink the world. Because think about it from a law enforcement perspective. If you're trying to get bad guys who are using shell companies and you have 32 million pieces of information to sort through, it's probably not the most targeted way to do it. So they're going to try to do a more targeted approach that might actually bear a little more fruit for law enforcement.
Such an important story, and I think this is probably the only show that's even touched on this, and this beneficial ownership part of the Corporate Transparency Act, which, as you laid out, very, very serious, but that is great news for small business people who now don't have to worry about now. Is this going to be revisited, and how do you expect all this to play out?
So there's still a lot of work to go. In the short term, I think small business owners can breathe a sigh of relief. I think in the long term, there's going to be probably challenges to what the Trump administration does in court. Hopefully that holds up. Then eventually, if there's a different administration, they can choose to rewrite the regulation to bring 32 million small business owners back into the fold, unless Congress acts to repeal this or get rid of this thing. So we are urging people to call their member of Congress and ask for repeal. There's getting momentum in both the House and the Senate. There's a bill called Repealing Big Brother Overreach Act, which will repeal this in both chambers. So if you're a small business owner, you're not out of the woods yet. This is good short-term relief for the next 4 years or so, hopefully. But another administration can get in there because there's a statute on the books and turn this thing right back on.
All right, since you have a front row seat there in Washington, anything else that's on your radar screen that you'd like to share with this audience as far as small business goes?
The potential tax hike on small businesses is a huge one, right? So the House just passed their budget that sets up this reconciliation process that allows this 50-vote threshold in the Senate to get around the filibuster. And if you're a small business, odds are you're not a C corporation. 9 in 10 small businesses aren't C corporations. They're what you call pass-throughs, which are basically anyone whose business income passes through to their personal income taxes. So that's S corporations, sole proprietors, partnerships. Is almost all small businesses, and they're paying individual rates. And as you're probably aware, 5 out of the 7 marginal or individual rates increase at the end of the year. And the 20% small business deduction, which allows small business owners, these pass-throughs, to lower their rate to get it closer to the C corp rate, also expires at the end of the year. So the small business community, if Congress doesn't do anything, is looking at a huge tax hike at a time when the larger C corps actually won't have any scheduled tax increase. So it'll be a real bind for Main Street if Congress fails to act.
All right. What is the outlook for all this? And now, how is this playing out? And what's the outlook? Are we going to see the biggest tax hike in history here, or are the Trump tax cuts going to be extended?
I think the fact that the House passed a budget last Tuesday was a huge, huge momentum mover. With a 1-seat majority in the House, the Republicans, a lot of people were doubting they can get a budget done, but they got a budget done. It now is in the Senate. And I think, things are looking more likely that there's going to be a good outcome, but there is a long, long way to go. The Senate still has to pass this thing, and then that just sets up the tax bill. So all this budget does is say, okay, now you can use this 50-vote threshold rather than 60. Now you got to go write the big bill, which even gets more controversial. So they're moving in the right direction, but it's going to be a little while, and there's still a few more hurdles to jump through.
All right, for anyone that wants to join your group or to follow your latest commentary, what's the best way to do that?
It's nfib.com. So welcome you to join.
Jeff BRABANT, the Vice President of Federal Government Relations for the National Federation of Independent Business. That's the NFIB. Jeff, thank you very much for that comprehensive update live with us here on the air this afternoon.
Of course. Thanks for having me back on.
Thank you very much. And out to the freeways now on 790 KABC.
It's a rich man's world.
Mottek On Money continues here, 790 KABC. Tariffs rattling the markets again today. President Trump's repeating that 25% tariffs on imports from Mexico and Canada would go into effect tomorrow. Impacted the markets today, especially the auto names. We saw a wild ride today. Ford pulling back to $9.39, a drop of 16 cents on the day. GM shares pulling into reverse, down nearly $2 at 47 and change. Tesla taking the biggest hit here, down more than $8 at $284.65. What does all this mean as far as you, the car buyer out there, and the car makers? Let's bring in our go-to car expert now, Lauren Fix, editor-in-chief of Car Coach and the co-host of the Total Car Score podcast, following the latest news on all this. Lauren, thank you very much for coming to the line this afternoon.
No problem. Yeah, this is obviously a big story. And I think there's a lot of mixed stories out there, whether you're listening to the mainstream media or you're looking on social media or whatever you're hearing. Cars are not going to go up by 25%. I've heard that. That one has obviously made me laugh, because you have to remember that when cars are produced, if they're produced in Mexico, for example, and they said Honda's going to move their production of one of their trim lines that was made in Mexico back to the U.S., and they're doing that because of the tariff. It's not because of the increase of the overall cost of the vehicle, it's the components. So it could be components are built here in the U.S., then shipped across to Mexico to be part of a sub-assembly, then shipped back into the U.S., or the other way around, parts are built in the U.S. and then shipped to Mexico to finish final assembly. So the idea is to bring all that production back to the U.S. But there is actually a goal in this, and I think that's what a lot of people don't realize. They think, why are we doing this? So obviously, you've heard that, you want Mexico and the U.S. to be equal, whether they're 10%, we're 10%, or they're 25%, we're 25%. It is uneven at this time. And this is part of what the Biden administration had left us, where, for example, we ship items into the UK and it costs us 25% or higher. And then items that come from the UK here are only 10%. And so the idea is to balance that out and also to cause production to come back to the U.S. But I think there's a bigger story. I think President Trump really wants to renegotiate USMCA, which is the United States, Mexico, and Canada, and the free trade deal. It actually expires, and it's scheduled to be redone July 1st of 2026. But because it's quite a distance off, I believe he's trying to get them to come to the bargaining table sooner, and this will definitely do it.
Very interesting. And what about electric vehicles in all of this? I know you follow that as well. We saw one truck company go bankrupt recently, and there's certainly been some big winners and losers in all of this. Tesla's come under pressure, including in Europe with those car sales numbers. Tesla sales have almost been cut in half in Europe, with Elon Musk getting a lot of attention there as well. Tesla stock taking a hit. Give us your thoughts about what's happening in the EV world right now.
Well, there's a lot going on in the EV world. I mean, first off, when President Trump took office, one of the first things he did is he turned off the 8,000 electric vehicle chargers that were at all federal government buildings. And he stated that he wants all the electric cars that are owned by the federal government to be sold. Good luck with that, because you're not going to be able to get nearly what they're worth, because the market just doesn't bear on used electric cars. Is that a chance to buy one? Maybe. It's like buying a used cell phone. You don't know if it's been on the charger a long time, how many cycles it's had. And those are the kind of things, like buying a used cell phone, you don't know what you're getting. Is the range going to be shorter or not? So it is a little bit of a buyer beware from that perspective. But if you want an electric car, you probably can pick up one, much like what Hertz did when they sold off their whole fleet. There still is some great deals as they're trying to get rid of everything they have. But as far as electric vehicles, we know that Lee Zeldin has already put, and we discussed this last time, that they're going to remove the electric vehicle mandate. And also we're removing the $7,500 tax credit, and that's coming to fruition. And because of that, consumers are going to be able to buy what they want, but manufacturers are now waking up to the fact that, customers don't want these. Not that I haven't been saying this for 20 years. If you want one, you should be able to get one. And there are people that do want them, and there are some fantastic choices. But keep in mind that manufacturers are looking at hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and gasoline-powered options. Every single brand that had their heels dug in on electric vehicles is now rethinking their platforms, bringing production back to the U.S., and that's smart. It's the smartest thing you can do for you and for them.
Certainly the horrific firestorm disaster and the hurricanes back east also have people rethinking of EVs when the power is out for weeks or even months and in difficult conditions. What are you hearing about people's experiences in disaster areas with electric vehicles?
I was actually in Southwest Florida during Hurricane Ian, which was about a little over 2 years ago. And I'll tell you, when you're getting told everywhere, all over the news, everywhere you go, on street signs even, like they put up these billboards, if you own an electric vehicle, park it, and it's got any water on it, park it outside, because it's much like any electric device. You don't know what's going to happen when water gets into that battery. It could cause all kinds of things, including deadly fires. And it's caused a lot of people to rethink what they're doing. I mean, even the neighbor across the street from me here said, yeah, I'm done, and they got rid of their vehicles. Other people have decided they like the hybrids. It gives you the best of both worlds. You get you run around town in electric and then the ability to ride on gas when you need it. So that's sort of made people rethink things. And I think the manufacturers dug their heels in. They're kind of in bed with the government as far as making things work. And it didn't work. So now they all have to backtrack on what they've done. And the bottom line is what you just said when you started this segment. Look at the stock prices. They're dropping. Tesla is an exception. They lead the globe essentially in electric vehicle sales. But remember, he's being punished by a lot of people who were big fans of Elon Musk, who are no longer fans for whatever reason. I think he'll be okay in the end. I don't think he's going out of business. So if you own a Tesla, you're probably going to be fine. It is the most popular American-made electric vehicle that's available, and the infrastructure isn't going anywhere. So you get the fast charging, and if less people are fighting for a charger, then it's good for you. So you can make that work too.
All right. Well, thanks for covering all the bases, as always, Lauren. We do appreciate it. And that story about the Trump administration ordering the shutdown of 8,000 federal EV charging ports and ordering the government to sell off 25,000 EVs acquired under the Biden administration, not getting that much attention. So thanks for highlighting that. There have been some write-ups on it. I'm sure you'll be talking about it on your excellent podcast. And so thank you very much for that comprehensive update. That is Lauren Fix, editor-in-chief of Car Coach and the co-host of the Total Car Score podcast, live with us here on Mottek On Money on 790 KABC. Stay tuned now for 790 KABC News Blitz with Randy Wang, and then stay tuned again at 6 o'clock. I'll be joined by Ken Winans, Winning with Winans. Ken Winans' program will be on the air once again live tonight, right here on 790 KABC. Stay tuned. And, of course, tune in again tomorrow afternoon at 4 for Mottek On Money on 790 KABC.
No Contest Wrestling. O'Shea Jackson Jr. and T.J. Jefferson with the biggest names in the game.
Ladies and gentlemen, X-Pac.
Getting suspended in school, that's the number one thing people, when they meet me, they tell me. There's
I got detention.
Yeah, everything.
Ladies and gentlemen, Liv Morgan.
I couldn't believe that was my time. I was so grateful.
Talking about living dreams. No pun intended, T.J. Relax.
I rarely do these anymore, but I was really looking forward to this.
The No Contest Wrestling Podcast, part of the Rich Eisen Podcast Network. Follow and listen on your favorite platform.